The character of Aaravos is the character of the tempter, the allurer, the strange and enigmatic magical figure who promises great windfall, great benefit, for only a bit of trust. This is a dark, sinister character that has been around for a long time. Some of the best manifestations of which are, say, Mephistopheles and Goethe's Faust. But as important as the tempter himself is the whole logic of the temptation. The tempter could not work any magic without the acknowledgement that someone has to be willing to be tempted. Someone has to be vulnerable. And this is important to do, and it is difficult to do right. Callum, I do not think, in The Dragon Prince, has proven himself the kind of character who is vulnerable to such temptations. I don't just mean temporary annoyance or the willingness to use dark magic that one time. I mean this deep longing and fragile, wistful darkness within him. We don't want what we should want, and that does not necessarily make us bad people. That is a fundamental truism that is, I think, a bit lost on people today. I mean, obviously it's not completely absurd, but I do think we tend in our stories to look at either, good guys, heroes, protagonists who are morally upright, maybe a bit flawed here and there, but are basically good people who do what is just and have no real moral issues, or people who are either actively malevolent or are anti-heroes who might have some reason to be like they are. They might have some practical circumstances or some personal trauma that leads them to commit the terrible actions that they do, but there is never any question that their actions are terrible. The anti-hero story and the traditional heroic morality play are not two different narratives. They are two versions of the same narrative. Now, that's not necessarily bad. Like, how to be good in a confusing and unjust world is a good, solid, promising foundation for narrative storytelling. Something like Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad are two sides of the same basic question. Walter White ultimately succumbs to his egotism and his ultimate narcissism, his desire to be remembered as this grandiose, magniloquent, elevated figure, while Saul, Jimmy McGill, ultimately steps away from that temptation to be this figure pursuing wealth and power and influence, and instead he takes responsibility for what he did and accepts punishment. In either case, there is still the fundamental problem of someone straying from what is good and doing something that is fundamentally bad. We're much worse, I think, these days in gray areas. And I think this is because we don't really have any firm societal standards that are not based on extreme things like oh hey, you shouldn't kill people. We are a relatively open society these days. That is a good thing, I think, but it also affects the way we tell stories. Something like, I really want this person. Even though it's bad, not just practically bad, but fundamentally against the morals and dictates of my society, is, I don't want to say completely absurd to us nowadays, but it's something we don't really have as much experience with. As opposed to, say, Anna Karenina. Tolstoy. Brilliant book. Anna Karenina, in her affairs, in her behavior, is both wrong and someone who is filled with desires that we can sympathize with. Not just something we can see as understandable, but wrong, but something that we question ourselves whether this is actually wrong or not. There's this fundamental discrepancy, this fundamental distance between personal values and societal values, and it's not that personal values are inevitably correct if they're rebelling against restrictive societal values, or that personal values are wrong if they condone, say, murder, and that makes you immoral. It's in that difficult gray area, the kind that's not anti-heroic or heroic, the kind that's messier. And I think that's the kind of desire that we have a difficult time understanding. And that's the kind of desire I think we have a difficult time with these days. The kind of desire that is fundamentally nocturnal. That is fundamentally against the will and the viewpoint of societal standards. And we accept it as that. And we don't try to say that, oh hey, this should be socially condoned. Such as say, oh hey, it's alright to leave your small hometown and run away to the big city. That's something that we don't have a problem with these days. We say that's completely justifiable. But the idea of something being this nocturnal desire, this desire that fundamentally goes against societal standards, but is nonetheless not something that is completely morally abhorrent, that's difficult. And I think that's a big part of the language that the tempter figure works in the best of times. It is not simply, oh hey, I will offer you a large amount of money if you murder someone, for instance. But it's rather, I am appealing to these desires that linger deep within you. Not desires that are wholly wrong, but desires that will nonetheless cause you a lot of difficulty and a lot of heartache if you follow through with them. This is a time-honored tradition, and in fact, for Nietzsche, this is what tragedy is. It is what he calls the Dionysian desire, what I'm calling the nocturnal desire, this intense, vivid, visceral desire that is nonetheless not either morally correct or morally abhorrent, but just natural and insistent and indomitable. And then you have the Apollonian world, the world of order and elegance and light. The world where everything makes sense, where people act like they're supposed to and benefit because of that, acting for the benefit of both themselves and others. Neither one of these worlds, the Dionysian world or the Apollonian world, is good necessarily for Nietzsche, although he himself does favor the Dionysian. But when mixed together and set into conflict, that's tragedy. I want Aaravos to be the kind of figure who can tap into those kind of hidden desires. And I think If he is able to do that, he will be much more than just this stereotypical tempter figure. This stereotypical figure who loves toying with people for his own benefit. That absolutely is a part of his character, but there has to be more to it than that. So, Callum needs to be able to have these dark desires. Not things that make him a bad person, but also not things that are just minor faults. If he is to overcome these desires, they need to be real desires, not simply passing caprices. If we're going to stick with dark magic, for instance, he needs to not only want dark magic, but have an ambition or grand plan or scheme connected to it. He needs to want it for his benefit. Maybe dark magic will, by some strange circumstance, give him something that he deeply wants but doesn't have. If, say, that he had the same kinds of desires that Claudia wanted, that he wanted to bring someone back from the dead with dark magic, that could easily be treated as simply him being bad. But if it's treated as fundamentally understandable, fundamentally natural in a certain sense to have those desires, and if the show treated him having those desires without moral condemnation necessarily, but just demonstrating the negative consequences that those desires would have, and if he was then able to overcome them, that would be more compelling. The tempter needs to actually be tempting. He needs to offer a vision to the world that is appealing to the protagonist, to Callum in this instance, not because these are simply bad desires that Callum has, but because they are understandable desires, natural desires, that appeal to a part of oneself that one hides away from the daylight world, the everyday world of order and reason, but desires that nonetheless need to be overcome not simply by ignoring them or saying that they're bad, but by working with them, thinking through them, feeling them, and ultimately transcending them. I hope the Dragon Prince is able to do something like that. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and do you want to see more videos like this. There is a big difference between a tragedy and a mere morality play, and I am hoping that I'm able to get at that in the remarks I've just made. So anyway, tune in soon for our next analysis. We'll be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.